Kristy-Lee, how are you going?
Juliet, hello. Great to be here with you today. We've got
Lovely
a
to see you.
juicy topic today.
Oh, I love this one. And I was talking about this recently um, with my leadership group. And I think it's something we don't really talk about a lot. So we're going to focus on toxic culture and how you can change it. And I think
it's such a great topic because it's when you find yourself in a toxic culture or in charge of a toxic culture, it's massively confronting for people, and it can be all consuming in terms of having to navigate it and deal with it. And I talk to a lot of business owners who find themselves with a toxic culture through no obviously intent of their own, and it is one of the most difficult things to navigate.
I think that's right. And I think I was talking the other day with someone who said, well, toxic, really, do we need to use that word? But I think the reality is yes. And I agree. I think that's probably the most difficult one, is when you inherit a team with a toxic culture, because that's an awful position to be in, particularly if you're on a bit of a roll in your career. And so you get given the team of non-performers.
Yeah.
But nobody
tells you. It's
really
hard because when you're interviewing for a role, particularly in a mid to large size organization, you often don't know a lot about the team you're about to be leading, and you can ask all the questions you like in interview, but until you're actually in the mix with these people, you don't know what you're walking into, and no one's going to tell you that you're inheriting the duds.
No, absolutely not. No one. Well, it's sort of unmentionable in a way, isn't it?
And I think so. A toxic culture can evolve over time, and then you can inherit it when you step into a leadership position, either in a new business or within your business.
Yeah.
And a toxic culture can also kind of fester and create itself when you've got your eye somewhere else with your team or with your business. And that's how I see it play out a lot in small businesses, particularly. It's that one sort of bad egg spoils it for the rest of the company usually. And in a small business, it doesn't take a lot for one bad egg to infiltrate and influence a team, and for a culture to become toxic right under the nose of the business owner. And often it's because of the lack of leadership, because we've never learned how to do that, that it can kind of snowball.
That's where I see it happen often, yes, because often the leader in a small business is technically fabulous, brilliant at what they do, doesn't actually want to have to run the team and do all that stuff. And as you say, doesn't really know how to lead. So other people in the team will step in and do that.
Yeah, I find that a lot of business owners just really stick their head in the sand when it comes to this, because dealing with a toxic employee on their own is very confrontational, often really outside our comfort zones. And we're going to cover this in a future episode. We're a little bit scared because we don't know how to deal with it. We don't know how to have the conversations. And we kind of assume it's an isolated individual, and we underestimate the impact they're going to have and the influence they have over the rest of the team very quickly.
And I think that's so true. Often when I'm talking with teams, I talk about that sort of the iceberg model. And I know we've talked about culture in the past, where, all that stuff we say about how we work, the policies and procedures and the goals and values and things, is that stuff that sits above the water. But the below the water stuff, the stories we tell and the traditions and the perceptions people have, is absolutely what is our culture and drives our culture. And I agree, if the leader doesn't get in there and create some of that and be part of it, then other people in the team will do that.
Oh, of course. And I see this a lot with, larger organizations, especially. They've got all the fancy words, all the values on the wall, all the, policies that say technically all the right things, but none of it translates to behavior and on the ground performance. And that's what creates your culture. It's nothing about what's written on the walls.
Yeah, totally. I think that's so true. So let's talk about, what does toxic look like? I mean, for me, the sort of overarching thing is that people are really focused on their own survival. There's no sense of community. When I go into a team where I can see things are wrong, there's also no humor, there's no levity, there's nobody just making a bit of a joke, or people just with that lightness that a functioning, happy team has. Do you see that?
Definitely. Yeah. It's almost like it's a vibe that you feel when you walk into one of these teams that you and I can recognize very easily because we've walked into a number of them in our time. But there's this sense of, there's certainly no trust amongst the team. So trust has been eroded
absolutely.
At lots of levels. And I find also there's a sense of almost like you're walking on eggshells. That's how the team can feel.
Yes,
because
totally.
there's this kind of fear that, oh, that's going to set them off and they're going to go, you know, a little bit cray-cray, or I know that if I do that, this is going to be the flow-on effect. So there's this, that also then, of course, erodes people's confidence to just do their job properly and do their job well. So it's often very small things and small signs that we look out for that indicate we've got a toxicity issue in the team.
I think that's right. I mean, I see often there's lots of rules and people are really scared to break the rules because they know no one's going to back them up. You know, in a strong team, you know, there's much less of that focus around rules. And if somebody did break a rule, there'd be other people going, well, it was a pretty stupid rule anyway. I think we've moved beyond it. In a toxic culture, what I see is people are really scared to break the rules because no one's going to be there to say that. They're just going to go, whoa, okay, your problem.
Yeah,
you know?
So people become isolated too then in that environment. And you will see that the only people who are not isolated are usually the leaders of the toxic culture. So the rotten egg that spoiled it for the rest, they're very good at rallying support around them. And if you've got people that are, you know, borderline engaged, so they've kind of started to check out, and quite often if you've got someone that's leading the toxic culture like a negative employee, they can be very influential and have almost like a charisma about them that the other team members who are borderline gravitate to very quickly. So one person can very quickly rally the troops and convince them that you're all being hard done by, or that this place is terrible, or whatever the angle is that they're taking. And so the only sense of camaraderie comes with the negative team. Anyone that's going to do the right thing becomes very isolated.
Yes. And I think as part of that, what I often see is that there is a real disconnect between leadership and the team. And so people like that in the team can flourish because the leaders are sort of up here doing whatever they're doing, but they're certainly not leading the team.
That's right. There's a big gap between leadership, and you'll often get also comments from team members that there's a lack of transparency and communication in these teams. And then there is a perception from the team quite often that there's a big gap between them and the leader, and then there's no kind of communication flow, no sense of connection between the two.
That's right. There's sort of directives coming down, but there's certainly no listening. There's no asking questions. There's no, how do we make it work?
Yeah, and almost like there's no understanding of what's actually going on because they're so, you know, just not in tune with the team. And quite often with the business owners that I work with who are in this situation, they've simply just stuck their head in the sand because it's too hard to deal with, and they hope that the problem's going to go away or sort itself out, which of course is never the case. It always gets worse.
It's never going to happen. But I think also people are in that state of fear where they're not going to challenge either. So ridiculous directives coming down or goals that are unrealistic don't get challenged often because people are too scared to sort of stick their head above the parapet. So they're just like, oh yeah, look, whatever. And so you have a whole lot of effectively, you have sort of prisoners in that culture because they're not people who are saying, I've been thinking about it, here's a better way, here's a great thing we could do. You know, they're just doing what they have to do.
Yeah, and quite often doing the bare minimum by this point because they're so disgruntled with how things are going. And I think what we also need to remember is our team are watching everything we're doing, and that includes when we're not taking action. So they're seeing that this is falling apart and you're not doing anything as the leader. That actually then erodes their trust in you as a leader. So it actually widens the gap even further.
That's so true. Yes. And it's really hard to get that back. But let's talk about how do we change that?
I think in essence, there's no one golden solution. You've got to do many things at once over a period of time to steer this ship in a different direction. And I think most critically, you have to lead effectively.
Yeah,
Mm.
totally.
What strategies do you see leaders successfully implement when it comes to turning a culture from a toxic culture into a positive culture?
I think there's two things I see that are really effective. And one is actually communicating. So getting a bit vulnerable, saying, okay, I don't have all the answers. So tell me what you think will work here.
Mm.
But also addressing behavior at the same time.
Mm.
And so having that conversation with the team. And I think all of this is about a completely different style. You know, it is about having a conversation and listening and saying to the team, how do you want to work together? You know, this is clearly not working. How do we make this work? What should we be doing? Why isn't this process effective? You know, getting them to tell you what's going on, but also how do we want to work together? You know, what's okay, what's not okay. And I think alongside that, certainly in the early days of trying to turn a toxic culture around, I see that real need to confront people who are toxic, people who are driving fear or who are cutting people from the pack, that sort of thing. So challenging things when they need to be challenged.
And I sometimes find that it's important to do a bit of a line in the sand moment and acknowledge that this is not where we want to be. This, you know, it's your business. This is not the direction I want my business going in. And sort of really calling out to say, this is the line in the sand. We're moving forward from here. And one of the strategies that I love using with teams when we're working through that behaviour piece particularly is using that above the line, below the line exercise that is used so often, but just getting the team to really form up, if we are playing above the line, if we are taking accountability and responsibility, what does that look like in terms of how we behave and how we communicate? And conversely, what's below the line? But fundamentally, we've got to create an environment where our team feel comfortable, particularly our best team members feel comfortable and safe to call out the behaviours that are not okay. Because if they're in fear, or they've heard you say this before and still take no action, or saying you're listening but clearly not listening, they won't feel safe to call it out and say, well, I'm not putting up with this. I don't want to be left with doing all the work because you've all gone off early for drinks or whatever the behaviour is. They need to feel safe and comfortable to do that. So you might need to do some work to create that environment first.
I think that's so true. And I know we've talked about it before, but it is absolutely true that team members will confront one another about behaviour if they know you would do it as the leader.
Yes.
But if they know that you're not going to do it, then certainly that doesn't make it safe for them to do it. And they're just sort of going to do that whole, well, it's not my problem. Why you need to fix your own mess. I think, but if they know that you would confront bad behaviour, then they feel that they can too. And I think that's such an important thing to be, again, we come back to that role modelling.
Yeah. And so you need to be able to call out the behaviours that you don't feel are okay and why not. And then when they do present themselves, because they will, you need to deal with them.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's so important. But I do think you, as part of that, you need to start having a conversation with your team. I was listening to someone talking yesterday about leadership, and they were using an example of a Navy captain in America who had trained for a specific boat, submarine, I think, in fact it was, submarine. And then he was given this really poorly performing submarine. You know, he was given, and it was a completely different type of submarine. And he realized when he got there, not only was the team really poorly performing and there was this really toxic culture, but he didn't really know how lots of parts of the submarine worked. And it was nuclear powered, and, you know, this was kind of important. And so he's, after a few weeks of, you know, clearly things not working, he said to the team, what should I do? Because actually I'm not sure I'm the best person here. And someone on the team said, well, you could just stop giving us stupid commands for a start, you know. And it enabled them to have a conversation with him. And he said what had happened was he was trained to be a command and control leader. He didn't know how to not be that.
Yeah.
So he had to ask the team, you know, for help, and obviously turned it around and got the team to be responsible and accountable for what they did, because he kept saying to them, okay, what are you going to do now? What should happen here? And they had the answers.
Yeah. And so listening is really important, and hearing your people. and then
Yes.
taking action
Yes.
based on the
Absolutely.
information you're gathering. Because you can listen all day long. If you don't take action, nothing is going to change.
And I think sometimes as leaders, we're a bit scared to A, say we don't know, but B, but by having this conversation, we give away all our leadership. And it's not true. You can still keep the ultimate leadership, and in fact, it makes you a much stronger leader. And you still have the ultimate say on what happens. But you enable your team to work together so much more effectively, I think.
Yeah, and it's got to be consistent. This isn't a one-time meeting that you have once,
No, absolutely.
get some feedback and then do some
Yes.
things. They need to see that this is how you're showing up constantly. And like you said earlier, role modeling. So if you're calling out behaviors you don't want to see in the team, you absolutely cannot be displaying those behaviors yourself. Or you're undermining everything. So it is about the little things you do every day consistently that are going to help turn a culture around. I worked with a business previously where I've done about, I don't know how many exit interviews for them, but every time, same feedback. And that is, we're told constantly when we're doing the wrong thing, but never once when we're doing the right thing.
Yes.
And it would be the simplest thing to fix if the manager in reference just actually read the exit interviews. It would cost no money and almost no time to just say, hey, great job. That simple.
Yes.
And they have a toxic culture because of this environment.
Well, and I think that's the thing. In a toxic culture, there's so much emphasis on what's gone wrong and who can we blame, and so little emphasis on celebrating any kind of wins, isn't there? Yes, I totally get that. I mean, that's what I say to people all the time when I'm working with teams. The most powerful feedback you can give is positive feedback.
Because people want it. It's like it's like a dopamine hit. They'll chase more of that. So give it to them. So that control and command, it's very old school. It's really not the best approach if you want to get the best out of people.
Absolutely not. It doesn't work. People don't respond to that. Maybe they did in the 50s in the Navy, I'm not sure, but certainly these days it's not okay. Absolutely. I think also once we make behaviors explicit, once we have a conversation with the team about how do you want to work and what's okay and what's not okay, and as you say, what's above and below the line, I think then when you're trying to hold people to account around their behavior, you can, as a leader, ask them to compare what they're doing to that behavior. How do you think you're going against this? Where do you think you sit? Because I think when we hold people accountable in that way, they get to take more ownership of it too.
Absolutely. And I think, in the best case scenario, you can create an environment where your team will hold each other accountable. And when a team does that, it's actually way more effective than you doing it as a leader. And I've worked with teams who have done that super effectively. And they've used the above and below the line concept to the point where it's on their walls, it's everywhere in their meetings, and team members will call each other up and say, I think that's a little below the line. And it's so powerful because no one wants to let their peers down.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so true. And that's what I love about it. It's really simple once you do it, but getting to that point, if you're trying to move from a toxic culture and from fear and, individuality to some kind of team, that can be a tough one. But once you get to that, I totally agree. I love it when I hear people saying to others, it's a bit below the line,
and they say it in a way that is totally supported by everyone on the team. And in a way that is, I would accept you calling me out on this as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think it's really effective. And I think the other thing, if you've got someone massively resistant to your new positive way of doing things, you may need to look to exit that person. And that is totally okay to do. And I know leaders that have walked into organizations that were large and extraordinarily underperforming and toxic and have literally just line in the sand, this is the direction we're going in. Are you on the bus or are you not on the bus? And if you're not, no problems. I'll help you exit off, I'll give you a reference, I'll do all the things. But if you don't want to be here for this, then this is not the right place for you. And that can take some courage to do that. But I think it's so important because if you've got someone that's just resisting all the way, it's going to hold back the progress of the team.
I totally agree. Yes. And I think that's the joy in a way of making things really explicit, isn't it? About being really clear about your expectations, about talking with the team about behaviors, because in my experience, the people who don't want to change will go anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you just encourage them to do it faster.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And they'll see that this is just not where they want to be. They don't feel like they fit anymore because they had their power in the old culture.
Yep.
Yes.
Exactly. They can go find it somewhere else.
Exactly.
That seems like a perfect note to end on.
Love it. Fabulous. And look, in the next episode, I think we're going to be talking about fear in leadership.
Yeah.
Which I think is sort of the precursor to some of this. So, but they go quite nicely together. But lovely to talk, Kristy-Lee.
Thanks, Juliet. Talk soon.
Okay.